keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares?
All right, so look with me in Matthew 25. We're going to actually go to the end of the chapter. Or not the end, I don't guess, but toward the end. Verses 31 through 33. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Now, there's more to that scene than those verses, but that's enough to start our discussion. So we've got this judgment scene. There's two things about this judgment scene that are noteworthy. First off, it is presented as royal. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, that's one thing. His glory, all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. Not merely a teaching offering moral instruction. And that is the way a lot of people want to know and to explain Jesus, as Jesus was just a rabbi. He was just a teacher. Even Islam acknowledges that he was a prophet, that he wasn't just a teacher, but he was a teacher of the things of God. But that's as far as they want to go. That is not how he's presented. He is coming in his glory. He is coming with all of the angels. What is that about? There's basically two ways you can read that statement. I'll concede that. The word angel, what's it mean? Messenger. That's all it means. Are there earthly messengers? Sure. Are there heavenly messengers? Yes. Does this verse describe exactly which ones are under consideration? No, it does not say that he will come with all the heavenly angels. You will find verses that expressly say heavenly angels, and you know exactly what's under consideration. So, whichever way you look at this, whether you believe this is the heavenly angels, by the way, I'll go on record and say that's the way I've always read it, is that it's talking about him coming from heaven because that's where he returned to, and therefore the angels of heaven are the ones that will accompany him back. That is, I think, supported with other passages like 1 Thessalonians 4 and other things that depict the judgment scene. But at any rate, whether you look at it that way or you say, well, this is just the messengers, it's drawing a distinction between him and the common messenger. He comes in glory. And all the messengers, whether they be celestial or terrestrial, come with him. They are following him. And he sits where? On his throne. This is a very regal and royal picture of him. It is asserting what? His kingship. Who sits on the throne? The king. What happens with someone else who sits on the king's throne, who's not the king? Historically, not good things. Those people are not received very well. That seat is reserved exclusively for the king. And I would even suggest to you this, that that seat is associated throughout the Bible with God. And so for him to come in all of his glory and sit down on the glorious throne is making a divine assertion, a royal and divine assertion about who he is. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Now, there's a couple other things that we have to note here. What this goes on to describe is that all the nations are gathered before him. What does that mean? Yeah. If the British king sat down on the throne in Britain and called for the people to be brought to him, for him to communicate something to them, who would be subject to go and listen? The British people. And a few other people besides the British folks. If you look at him as being the king of the United Kingdom, then he also has a few other small countries that are brought into that realm of having an obligation to hear him. But what about Americans? You know, we didn't listen to the king when we were subjects of him, uh, which is a historical thing that we have to overcome. And what I mean by that is there is a very, very independent individual spirit among us by our upbringing and values of our society. And that is something that we have to fight with as Christians so that we are not independent from God and rebellious against God and deciding that our way is the right way and we're not subject to him. But anyway, all the nations, what this indicates is the universality of his reign. It is not just Israel that was brought before him. It was all it wasn't just the descendants, the direct descendants of Abraham that were brought before him, which would include more than Israel. There's several other nations that might be included in that. One particular other nation that would be included, that's the descendants of Ishmael. But it's not just the descendants of Abraham, because, and we talked last week a lot about that Matthew goes out of his way to make the connection back before Israel and before the covenant with Israel to Abraham. But this is not just Abrahamic. It is truly universal. All nations are gathered before him. And gathered, I think, is even an interesting word to use there. Because what does gathered suggest? Okay, that they were scattered certainly suggests that, but what else? It suggests to me that they were compelled to come. A mother hen that gathers her chicks, those chicks don't come on their own. The mother hen does what? Goes around and pulls them all in. And that's the image here is of this gathering that is compelled upon the nations. There's a lot of nations that are unwilling to submit to the king. And by nations, read peoples. And if we want to make it actual to the way the judgment's going to work, individuals who are the component parts of those peoples and nations. A lot of individuals that refuse to honor the king, they're not going to be able to avoid this gathering. There are people who avoid many gatherings. There is a call for the people of God to gather together every first day of the week. In this place, there are a lot of people who don't gather. If the entire city decided to gather, we would have problems. We wouldn't have places to put them all. This is not going to be something that is able to be ignored as it's presented here. He is going to come. He's going to come with all of his messengers. Again, I will tell you that I believe that's talking about the heavenly angels. He's going to sit on the throne of God, and he's going to gather all nations before him. And there's not going to be a choice about this. And so the scope is very important. Earlier in the gospel, the mission focus had been different. And we studied, I think this was part of last week's, it may have been the week before, but we were talking about Matthew chapter 10 and particularly verse 6, where he told his earthly messengers, his disciples at the time that he was sending out, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. There was a very specific focus of the work that was being done at that point. But what Matthew is doing is broadening this and saying these things apply to everyone, not just to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So the nations stand before the king together. And so Matthew, as we mentioned earlier, began in chapter 1 with an introduction that he was a descendant of Abraham. He begins with Abraham, and then he includes the Gentiles in the, well, we talked about that in the lineage record that Matthew does. There's a smattering of Gentiles that are actually pulled into that lineage, non-Israelites. And now he makes the application where all nations are going to stand before the king. He's not just the king of the Jews. What was hung over the cross? The charge. We're told in the text, the king of the Jews. He wasn't just the king of the Jews. He's the king of all nations. Separation is personal and unavoidable. This judgment scene is depicting a separation, right? He will separate them from one another. As a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, this is depicting a very individual thing. You got one herd, but among those herds are what? Well, actually, there's two herds. There's two herds intermingled together. You've got the nations called before Christ. You've got the herd of sheep and the herd of goats, but he is separating them as individuals, right? And that's exactly what's going to be going on with Christ and with this separation that's going to be going on. It's very personal and it's unavoidable. No one disappears into the crowd. No lineage, no association, no national identity. Removes personal accountability before the king. Now, I say that way. It's kind of important to say it that way because I do think that there is a point that's being made here along those lines. And here's one illustration of why that point's necessary. Matthew's gospel is going out into a world that is largely controlled by who? Who ruled over Israel at the time? Rome. Who ruled over Greece? Rome. Who ruled over the southern part of Europe? Rome. By the way, in the coming centuries, they would keep pushing their rule. And this is real important. This is talked about in the New Testament as well. One of the things, for instance, that Paul does at one point, when he is being disciplined by the authorities, is say what to them? I'm a Roman citizen. Why does he say that? Because as a Roman citizen, he is afforded protection from being judged by certain people. Roman citizens were guaranteed what? Certain rights and privileges because of their citizenship, which ultimately one of was Rome's in control of you, not anybody else. So you don't have to worry about that. You're a Roman citizen, they can't do anything to you. From a de facto standpoint, a practical standpoint, the same is true with the attitude, at least, if not the practice of Americans. As we travel, more often than not, in most countries of the earth, if an American gets in trouble, ultimately they're sent back to America for the Americans to adjudicate and decide what needs to be done. There's a few countries that will buck that. But for the most part, we claim sovereignty over our citizens and we tell nations, no, you can't do that to our citizens. Give them back to us and we'll punish them. This is showing us that no one is immune from this judgment. There's no association. There is no place. There's nothing that you can belong. Even if you belong to a different kingdom, you're called before this king and you're subject to his judgment, and there is nothing you can do to escape it. So we have this theme throughout the Gospel of Matthew, where he says, okay, the true sons of Abraham are identified not through their bloodline, but they're identified how? By their faith and their obedience. Then he says, or not then, that implies a disconnect. Additionally, he says, mere outward association is not sufficient. To just say that we are the sons of Abraham is insufficient. The king distinguishes between true allegiance and empty profession. He separates. He decides who's a sheep and who's a goat, just like the shepherd. I'm reminded of Matthew 13:30 and an important lesson that is taught to us there. I think a lesson that's sometimes misunderstood. Matthew 13:30, let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them into bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now, it's important that in that context, that parable, we are told that the field is the world. We're not talking about some subset of humanity. We're not talking about a nation. We're not talking about the church. The field is the world. And he says that there's going to be tares and there's going to be wheat, both that grows in this world. But who determines what they are and who sets the judgment for them? Well, he does. And that's essentially what's going on here. Everybody in the world is going to stand before him in judgment. He's going to sit on his glorious throne and he is going to separate. And there's ought to be, I think, a measure of humility taken even among those who profess to be faithful to him today. And that is, I don't necessarily know who all is with him and who's not. It's not left for me to decide that this person is not acceptable. That's not my job. That job resides squarely on the shoulders of him who is returning in all of his glory and seated on the glorious throne specifically for the purpose of this separation. And that's why that story in Matthew 13, let both grow together, is so important. It's not my job to get rid of all the bad people. Not my job. Now, there's some limited sense in where that becomes our job, but only where he specifically authorizes and asks for it. We won't talk about it right now, but I'll just suggest maybe you read 1 Corinthians 5 as something to consider in that regard. So then, faithfulness to the king, we find out, is demonstrated through action. So judgment is connected to the lived response to the king. The king's words, uh, well, they focus repeatedly, actually, upon what people did. Look earlier in the, well, is it earlier or later? What was verses? I was in verse 32. So yeah, it's a few verses down in verse 35. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I was sick and you visited me. You notice as he's making this determination and he's talking to people, he is talking to them about what they did. And so that judgment is connected to our lived response to his authority, not just our mental awareness of his authority. It's not talk. It's not simply saying, oh, yes, he is king. It's not admiration by itself, but it's lived allegiance that is under consideration here. Matthew has consistently stressed this theme again throughout the entire gospel. Back in chapter 7, verses 16 through 20, the fruit reveals the tree. How do you know what kind of tree it is? Well, you look at the fruit, and by its fruit, you'll know what it is. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24. He's talking about the wise and foolish man and building houses and the foundation upon which is built. And he says in verse 24 that the wise man hears and acts. Matthew 7:21, doing the will of the Father. He who does the will. Again, doing is the foundation and the focus of the determination. So faithfulness is demonstrated in conduct, not just in awareness or in some theoretical sense or in a title that you wear or an association that you have. There's a lot of people out there, well, I'll say it like this. Okay, a lot of people out there, no other labels I'm going to place on them other than this. At some point in time, they were initiated into a fellowship of Christians. All these words are going to be in quotes because they're being used in non-biblical ways, but more in worldly ways. And so maybe it's as a child they're baptized, or maybe it's at some point later in life they're baptized, but they're initiated into a fellowship of Christians. And then they go on about the world and live their life however they want to. And if they're asked, they say what? I'm a Christian. I was baptized. And for a lot of these organizations, once you're initiated in, you're in. And what he's showing here is that faithfulness is not demonstrated that way. It's not just some kind of association and ritual that you perform and then you're one of them. And there's a lot of human organizations that function that way. I'll tell you, if you meet someone who served in the Marine Corps who is no longer active, you will be told, I am not a former Marine. There is no former Marines. Same is true for many civic organizations, fraternities. Once a whatever, always a whatever. It's all over the world and all over the way that men think, and that is counter to everything that Matthew is teaching. The book of Matthew is teaching constantly that it's about who we are daily and how we react, not just to God, but how we react to people because of our association with God. So we go back up here again. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. Why? Why did I give him something to eat? Well, when you go down to the cup of cold water instruction, when you've given a cup of cold water to the least of these, my brethren, then you've done it to me. So it's about our lived experience at every level and what it means to be associated with the king and how I treat other people and engage with other people and serve other people. I do it because of who I am. Maybe there's a more clear way of expressing that. I do it because of who he is and my desire to fellowship him in his righteousness. Um, the judgment scene here in Matthew 25 is not introducing a new idea. It's gathering all of these themes and then saying it's going to matter at judgment. Who you were and what you did and how you lived is going to matter at judgment. The righteous are often unaware of the significance of things that they're doing. I think that's an interesting lesson that we can draw from Matthew 25. He says, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was imprisoned, you visited me. And look at verse 37. Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we? Now, the judge just said you did these things, and the person who did them saying, when did I do that? It's very important because it tells us that the actions are not being performed for any kind of public recognition, for any kind of self glory, for any kind of checklist, which is the way a lot of people think about service to God. Their conduct flowed from a genuine allegiance to the king, to the degree that sometimes they were doing these things and not even realizing that it was service to the king, because it had become such an ingrained part of who they were, it just flowed naturally. They weren't saying, hey, I'm going to give this person food because it's the king. They were seeing someone in need and giving them what they needed because they followed the king. By contrast, look at verse 44. Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? See, the contrast is on the other side. There's going to be people who think that they did all these things. Look at all these things we did for you. And the question is not going to be, hey, when did we do something? It's going to be, when did we not do it? When did I walk past you, Lord? I would never have walked past you. And listen, that's the way most of us live, right? And let's be completely fair and honest about it. If we pass a friend or someone that we know who's in trouble, we turn around and go back to help. But a complete stranger, maybe not. Why? Well, because we know this person. All right, so I wouldn't pass the Lord without helping him out. But the least of his disciples, who are they? And that's the contrast that's going on here. And the fact of the matter is these people are so oblivious to the fact that they are passing by these people and that those people are connected to the king that they don't think they've ever not helped the king. When did we not do this? See, the difference is not acknowledging Jesus as Lord. Both of them call him Lord, right? The ones who did and the ones who didn't, the ones who were approved and the ones who were disapproved. Lord, when did we? Both of them call him Lord. That's not the difference. Both of those groups use his title. The distinction is revealed through their obedient response, their daily, common, obedient response. What they do when they're not in the presence of the glory. Okay, so if we want to make a practical application of that, it's the difference between what we do when we're here in the assembly and when we're in the workplace or at school or on the sidewalk somewhere. And for many of us, there are things that we will do and say out there that we would never do and say in here. And we have to start examining ourselves and asking why. Is there some legitimate reason for that? Or is it simply a thing of, well, when I'm in that setting around those people, I need to look this way because I'm serving. And when I'm out there, I can do anything I want to or not. Um, this is a continuation of a warning that was already stated way back in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Just calling him by the title doesn't put you in the kingdom. Matthew consistently refuses to separate allegiance from obedience. Throughout the whole book, there is this connection between doing and actually being faithful. The king in this passage identifies himself with his people. Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these my brothers, even the least of them, you did it to me. That is identification. I'm associated with them. So he identifies with his people, and that the treatment of his people is accounted to the treatment to him. And I think that there is both covenantal implications of this, and there is royal lineage implications of this. To receive those belonging to the king is to honor the king himself. To respect the citizen is to respect the king. Again, that is how Rome looked at things as well. Someone that hit a Roman citizen could get in trouble because it was viewed as an offense against Rome. Same kind of idea here. Jesus is saying to them, look, what you do to my children, you do to me. Now, here's what we need to realize. The beginning of this, the first thing that we pointed out was that his rule is what? Universal. So the application of that for the Jew was, look, you can't just say you're going to do good to the Jew and you're going to ignore the Gentile, but you have to serve the Gentile as well. And toward that end, there was a parable talked, parable of the Good Samaritan. Who proves to be the real neighbor in that parable? Well, it was a Samaritan, not the priest, not the fellow Jew, but the Samaritan proved to be the neighbor. He's a universal king, and therefore he has universal subjects. Whether or not they make themselves worthy of that association or not is another question entirely. But my obligation is to do what? To show kindness to all of his subjects. If you do it to the least of these, you do it to me. Um, this is carrying through this concept that I think we don't do a good job dealing with sometimes in the value of Jesus coming in the flesh. That was God with us. There can be no greater demonstration of his desire to be associated with man than for him to leave heaven and come to the earth and live as a man, live as one of us. He can't be any more associated with us than that. And so he's identifying himself as being with us. What you do to one of us, you do to all of us. Again, I'll draw from the political world. We have various alliances with people. One of them is the NATO alliance. I don't know that we live by this code the way that we claim that we're going to, but in NATO, an attack against one is an attack against all. That's the same principle. God is saying that I am there, I am engaged, I am in fellowship. And so allegiance to Christ becomes visible in how one responds to his people and his message. So it's more than just the message. It's more than just what we do ourselves. It's how we use ourselves for others. And we're out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up. We're going to pick up the third leg of this, talk about judgment revealing eternal outcomes, and a few more things before we move on into the conclusion of the study. We'll may or may not get into session 13 next week, but we're going to finish this material for sure next week. This is very...
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea.